Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay. Apparently, these Zoom meetings are no longer scheduled, so I don't get a reminder 10 minutes beforehand to start the video. So I apologize for that. And then it had me sign back in to Zoom. So it just took me a little bit longer to get things set up. But now we are all good to go. We are all set. I think this is going to be everybody who's going to show up today. So let's get started. We will be talking about season 4, episode 1, which for some of us we got to watch again last night. I know the Tegans, you went and saw it in theaters with us the first time when it first came out, and I think you said you went and saw the first 4 again when they re-released them in theaters. If I'm
Well,
remembering
Renee did. I only got to see the first 3, and then she ended up seeing the next series. She saw 4 and 5. I didn't get to see those.
Okay. But we will be.
Oh yeah, and for today, I'm Renee.
Okay, gotcha. And I want the Tegan family to know that we will be trying to schedule to watch episode 2 sometime. You should be receiving a poll about what times are going to work best. I will have a list of days and times that'll work well, and people will just say these are the days that'll work best. And we may end up doing multiple days based on what works best for everybody.
Yeah, I'll just put that out here for us. Just since there's not a lot of us here, you don't have to do a consulting a whole group. For us, Tuesdays are the only days that don't work. And that's because Civil Air Patrol is Tuesday night.
Yep.
That's it for us.
Okay. Yep, and I remember Renee telling us that, telling me that, and Tuesdays aren't going to work at all anymore now that softball is going to be starting up here soon. That's when softball is on Tuesday nights. So Tuesdays were going to already be off the table here soon. But I will send out some other times still because there are some other people who want to watch it who may not be here at the classes. So I will be sending out a poll for people to be able to come and watch because we have access to the first 4, so we can watch it basically whenever we want, as long as they still have that available to us, which I'm assuming will always be available until the first 4 episodes are released for everybody to be able to consume online. But let's talk about this episode. This episode focused really not on Jesus or the disciples, really. There was some stuff going on in the background, mainly that Rhema had returned, and now she and Thomas are going to be getting married. They just have to take care of some logistical things. But that's the main thing that's going on with the disciples, as well as Zebedee finally starting his oil business with the synagogue. So we have those 2 things going on in the background of the main event that's going on in this episode, and that is all about John the Baptist. In this episode, we bounce around a little bit. We go back to the beginning with John and when he was born, where Zechariah is unable to speak, and Mary comes and sees Elizabeth, and they talk to each other. And so we'll have a little bit about more of the Zechariah and John the Baptist side of it, not really focusing on Mary and baby Jesus. We'll maybe talk a little bit more about that if we end up watching the Christmas episodes that they have out. But we focus on John the Baptist and hearing about his coming birth and how Elizabeth is excited about that. And we even get to see the circumcision of John the Baptist, where he is named John, much to the surprise of everybody, on top of the fact that Zechariah suddenly is able to speak. And this is mixed in amongst what is happening in the present time. All these flashbacks really focusing us on what is going on at this point in time with the daughter of Herodias practicing dancing so that she can convince the king, King Herod, to kill John the Baptist.
Wasn't that the motivation of the mother, not the daughter?
Yes, it is the whole motivation, but that's why she's practicing, is so
Right.
that she will get that opportunity to be able to do that. This is the goal of it all, is ultimately to receive the head of John the Baptist.
Now, see, I have often wondered. It seems in scripture, at least when I hear this story in the Bible, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I've read it, but not as extensively as you. But I got the impression that this was long on the heart of the wife. I can't remember. It's not Salome. Is it? No.
Herodias.
Okay, sure. I'll let you pronounce it. But I don't know. Did the daughter have an inkling of where this was headed? I think it was almost like not until the king asked or gave her "Ask Me Anything" that the daughter was coached.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem like that. We actually, the one we're going to be looking at will suggest that no, she had no idea. She was like, I don't know what to ask you for, so I'm going to just ask my mother what I should ask you for, and she told her, ask for the head of John the Baptist. In the parallel account in Mark, no, it's the other way. In Mark, that's the one we're reading tonight. But if you look in Matthew's account, there is no, the daughter does not consult with her mother. So it seems like she did go and consult with her mother, but that she wasn't surprised or didn't try and fight back about it. So she knew this was going to happen sometime. She just didn't realize, hey, this is going to be why I'm doing this.
Yeah,
I
because
don't think the daughter.
I always felt like the absolute hatred came from the heart of the mother, and that
Yep.
the daughter was just the tool, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, she, my guess is that she wasn't surprised when her mother said, ask for the head of John the Baptist. And she was happy to do that for her mother because she knew of all the strife this was causing her mother. And so she was going to just do that for her. But we do see that this was all part of Herodias's plan from the beginning. It'll actually state that sort of in a way in our lesson for today when we talk about the death of John the Baptist. We will see, okay, this definitely, what they show in the episode about the mother, what her plan was about using this as an opportunity to kill John the Baptist, that was very much scriptural. But how much did the daughter actually know about this beforehand? We don't know.
On a different
Most
note,
likely nothing.
were we ever told, and this is because this aspect of the story was something I never focused on, were we ever told in the Bible why Herodias felt this way? Was there
Yes, and we
something
will
that John
talk
didn't
about
do
that.
for her? Yeah, that John didn't do that she wanted him to do? Now that I talk out loud, I don't know if, like, did she want John to sleep with her?
No,
I can't remember.
I will. When we get to it, it'll be the last lesson we get to. We'll see exactly the reason why she was upset. But yeah, so she wants the head of John the Baptist. Her daughter dances for King Herod, who is impressed by her, and he says, I will give you anything you want, up to half of my kingdom. And everybody is in hearing of this, and that's when she asks for the head of John the Baptist. And we're going to hear that the king is a little bit conflicted about it, but he ultimately goes through with it. And Joanna, who was a sort of a disciple of John, who lived seemingly in the palace, or was at least connected with the king and queen, she goes back to find Andrew and Philip in order to tell them that John has died. And Jesus also, we see, finds out that John has been executed, and that sort of thing has happened, and that has happened finally to John. He's been expecting it it's still just a sad thing for it to have happened. We could talk a little bit about John and his execution. He was looking forward to it. He was happy, knowing that his mission was complete and that he had done his job and that he had prepared the way for the Lord. Are there any questions about the episode? Any comments about things I may have missed that you want to talk about?
I don't know if they did it for dramatization, but I thought it was appropriate that, yes, John was looking forward to it, and Jesus being God, it's interesting that you see his sadness. Like last season, you see his sadness when he and John separate, what will be for the final time, right?
Yep.
So there's already awareness. I mean, it's shown in facial expressions and stuff. And then you see when he's out by himself before the news is delivered, that he's already, downcast and everything else, that he's already aware of what has happened. And I think while not said, obviously, in scripture, not written in word, but the visualization of seeing the spirit of John as out in the field was kind of interesting little aspect there, that, while Jesus was sad, he still knew that John was, in a better place, so to speak.
Yep, definitely. He knew what was about to happen. He knew what news he was going to be receiving here shortly. Exactly.
Well, like I said, he knew last season. I think he knew when he and John departed. So it's like, obviously being God, he's outside of time, so he knows omnipotent, right? He knows it all anyway.
Yeah.
But the fact, and I think this is the interesting aspect, and you can stop me because I will go off on a tangent, Pastor, and I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
It's interesting that even though he knows all this, I'm sure this is kind of a thing where people start questioning, well, if Jesus knew everything that was going to happen, where's this concept of free will? That it's like, if we're still making the choices, yet he's aware of that John is going to die. He's probably aware of how John is going to die and that sort of thing. That meant there was no room for anything to alter that future. And this is not me arguing against it. It is just an interesting thing that I'm sure is something others will pick apart in different locations of the Bible, but the same concept, though. Predetermination, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. It's the question that plagues a lot of people about, well, if God knows everything, isn't everything predetermined? Because that's the only way he could know what we are going to do and knows that we're going to make that choice. And that's where we realize our free will is actually far more limited than we tend to think. We can only choose to do really that which is evil and goes against God. We can't choose things that go in the direction of God.
I was going to say, I think that's the thing. It's like the idea of free choice for us is going in the opposite direction. You could choose to sin, because it's interesting that that is almost a conscious choice. I think, the idea that the law is written on people's hearts, everyone has it, but there's probably not a person on the planet who thinks killing someone is an okay thing, or taking someone else's property is an okay thing. Everyone's aware of it. That's the choice aspect. Like, you could choose to do the wrong things.
Yep.
And that's where your choice lies.
Yep. Yeah, and
there are some people on the planet who think killing people is okay. I mean,
but I would have to say, I want to say that they've got to be aware of it, though. And it's like they're making that choice. And I think that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, but Muslims, get rewarded in heaven, quote unquote, when they kill infidels. So
that is an interesting thing, because they're well, even the Bible for the history authorized it, but I think it's the Muslim one, if I understand Islam well enough, and I'm not an expert by any means, but theirs is a more open-ended acceptance, or that it's okay for them to do it in given circumstances, in given situations. Like, they do have it, but they have it in a specific, there's some specific guardrails of how far they can go where killing is justified. But I think our Bible does not provide for that. It's like the idea is when, when Israel was fighting for its existence, when there was battles taking place and wars, that was okay, with God with us, who can stand against us kind of thing, right? But we stopped at some point, whereas Islam says, no, you can continue to do this till, in perpetuity kind of thing. I
Mhm.
think every
Yeah.
permission given by God was done for a specified time period kind of thing.
We haven't stopped killing people because when we hate someone, we kill them. So
You're right, Todd, but that aspect of hatred is the aspect of wanting their demise. And I do agree with that. But what I was saying is you brought up Muslims, and I think their writings provide for them to continue to do that, whereas the biblical ones do not.
Yes, I get where you're going, Eric, with that. You're saying that the Quran basically does say, hey, it's okay for you to kill people as long as they are infidels, as long as they are against Allah. Whereas with the Bible, God says, I want you to kill these people because they have sinned against me, and destroy them completely because their sin has come up to me. But after a time period, he's like, nope, I don't call for that sort of thing. He says, I don't even call for you to hate. You should not hate anyone.
Isn't there another thing that is missing in the Quran, that there is no gospel message?
Yeah, no, there is no gospel message. The thing about that would be they would
So
say
they live perpetually in the Old Testament mindset, right? The laws, there is no gospel message, which then means confrontation and conflict is ever there.
Yep. Any other questions or comments about the episode before we jump into our lesson for today? Not, then I just sent out the link with the worksheet on it for you to open up and to follow along. A majority of what we're going to be reading is from Luke chapter 1, because that's a majority of where the episode was taking place, was within the birth story of John the Baptist, as well as his death. The death is only found in Matthew and Mark, but we're going to go through the entire birth narrative for John the Baptist. And we're going to also read through the Song of Zechariah, because I think it tells a lot of things about John and what he's expected to do that we see in the episode, and then we'll jump into his death.
Pastor, what you put in the chat doesn't appear to be an active link. So
It is not an active link.
no.
I was able to get to it, so I'm not sure.
Let me try it again and we'll see what happens.
Maybe it's
I got to it.
Try that.
yeah, it's not showing up as a
It
it must be our
It's fine.
we're on a
whatever, it's
Chromebook.
fine.
That's fine. Just
Okay, well here, I'll just do something else. It will make things slightly easier. I don't know if it will make things easy for everybody else. I will instead share my screen with the words all on here. I will adjust how it is seen. All right, let's go. Now, view,
I know.
reading view. There we go. Let's see. We'll try it like this. Are you able to at least see what's on the screen, Smolden family?
yes.
Yes?
Yes, we are.
Just She just tried to.
Okay, well, hopefully this will work a little bit. All right, so we will start.
I've already read it. You got me got questions already.
Good. Good. So we're gonna get started. We're gonna look at Luke chapter 1, verses 5 to verse 25. Okay. So in the time of King Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Once, when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." The angel said to him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. When his time of service was completed, he returned home. After this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant, and for 5 months remained in seclusion. "The Lord has done this for me," she said. "In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people." All right. So what do we learn about Zechariah and Elizabeth in the first few verses of this section?
They were very old.
Yes, they were very, very old. Let's see, make sure I can still see.
What I found interesting is I love when there's parallels in the Bible. And it might just be me finding patterns that aren't there, but I do like seeing them when it's pointed out that Elizabeth is a descendant of Aaron. Aaron was the, air quotes, the assistant to Moses.
Mhm.
John is, in air quotes, the precursor to Christ.
Yeah,
It's kind of, like I said, it's an interesting parallelism that probably doesn't mean anything, but for me, it's just interesting to see.
nope, you are definitely onto something, because one of the last things that Moses tells the people of Israel is that right before he dies, he says, "Look, I'm going to go away. I'm going to disappear. And I know you're going to be sad about that because you've never had a prophet like me before, but I'm going to tell you that there will come a prophet greater even than I." And that was referring to Jesus. And just as Aaron was the one who went before Moses and prepared the people for what Moses had to say, that is where And that's what John did for Jesus. So Josh is wondering if there are any other times recorded in. Yes. There are a number of times where people saw visions in the Bible specifically. There's a number of times. Well, Revelations, yes, but also in, like we see in the book of Acts, that Paul has a couple of visions. Peter has a couple of visions. And then towards the end of Acts, there are a number of other people who see visions about what's about to happen to Paul. And Paul says, "Yep, I know," and then he keeps going anyway. Despite everybody's warning, telling him don't do it, he's like, no, this is where I'm meant to go. So yes, there are lots of different people who have revelations, who have visions outside of what Zechariah was seeing. And obviously, Joseph, the father of Jesus, also, at least the earthly father of Jesus, has a vision of an angel. Mary has a vision of an angel. Stephen has a vision of Jesus in heaven. Goodness, lots of people in the New Testament have visions about things. Even Pilate's wife has visions about how Pilate should have nothing to do with Jesus.
Yeah, I think the question was directed, were there visions that occurred post-crucifixion? Were there visions that occurred after the death of Christ that, to make it clear that the visions did not just occur Old Testament times. After Jesus came and went, there were visions that people still had.
Yep,
So-
there were lots. Lots of people still had visions. All right. But now, what was Zechariah doing when Gabriel came to speak with him?
It was his turn to do the duty of incense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It was his turn to fulfill his duty of serving in the temple and bringing forth the incense. He was bringing forward incense into the temple, which really fits well with what Gabriel ends up saying to him. Can someone summarize in your own words what Gabriel says to Zechariah?
I have to laugh out loud because I really like to simplify things. Gabriel says, "You're going to have a kid. You don't believe me? Shame on you. Be silent."
Yep. Yep.
What I find hilarious is the fact that an angel appears to him. He's probably never seen an angel before. That has to be a pretty amazing experience. And yet he still doubts the fact that he's gonna have a kid.
Yep. And I'm gonna bring something up that may.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I find it interesting the words that the angel used, and then the question that Zechariah asks do not very well coincide if you think in terms of straight timeline, because
Yep.
there's nothing in the previous verses that imply that Zechariah has not accepted his old age and that he's still praying for a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the angel says your prayer has been heard. So at some point, Zechariah made a prayer, but when it's like his question is like, well, I'm already old. So it's like at some point between the prayer and this moment, he accepted his age.
Yep. And that really leads into this next question. What might have led Zechariah to doubt what Gabriel says? Look at verse 13. What does Gabriel say?
Yeah, do not be afraid. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife
Yeah.
will bear you a son, and you're to call him John.
Yeah.
and many will rejoice. Yeah. So it's like your prayer has been heard.
I don't know that it's all that surprising that he didn't believe. I mean, I look back at Sarah and Abraham, and what was her first response? She laughed.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't silenced, lucky for her, but I guess she could have been. I think that, to me, it's encouraging that even these people who were far more devout and far more, their relationship with God was much stronger than mine. I mean, that was these are people who are listed in Hebrews. Their faith was huge. Their faith is held up for us as a, as the, like, these people are the people of faith, and they still doubted.
Yeah.
I think that's a very comforting message. I mean,
That's-
that even these devout people, like you were pointing out, have failings, and that didn't diminish God's love for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that isn't really made clear here, especially in English, is if we look at Zechariah's question in the Greek, and then we just jump ahead a few more verses and we see Mary receiving the same sort of message, they say the exact same thing. How can this be? How is this possible? And yet, when you look at it, yes, Zechariah is being more doubtful. He's wondering, going, how can it even be possible? I am an old man and my wife is well along in years. It's not possible. How can I be sure of this? A really good understanding of it, especially in light of your prayer has been heard. Who knows how long it's been since Zechariah actually prayed that he and his wife would have a child, let alone a son.
I find it interesting when you compared the two. It's a small word, but it in my mind, I'm sorry if I study languages too much and maybe read too much into something, but there's a difference between asking, how can this be, and how can I be sure of this?
Yeah.
One is asking for just explanation. How could this happen? The other
Mhm.
one is saying, prove it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There is that difference between the two. And so now, how does Gabriel give that confirmation to Zechariah that this will happen in verses 19 and 20? What does Gabriel say that gives confirmation?
Well, the news comes from God directly.
Yeah. Yeah, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I have been specifically sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news.
Now, be quiet, you stupid ape man.
Yeah.
It's like, it's hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. And he just says, no, from now on, this is your punishment. Until baby is born, you will not be able to speak. Which will lead us to an interesting question, because if we notice what he says, you will not be able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words. Note what he actually says, until this happens. Because a lot of people will say, well, John was born. Why is he still not able to speak? And we'll see, when is Zechariah actually able to speak. Now, more than likely, Elizabeth was told by Zechariah exactly what happened inside the temple. What does Elizabeth say when she realizes that she is pregnant?
She took a cue from her husband. God did this for me.
Yeah.
She questioning it.
She learned.
Yeah. She realized, well, if he's mute and if I say I don't believe it, Well, then we'll both be mute. So this has been done by the Lord. He has taken away my disgrace because it would have been a disgraceful thing. That's why it was such a big deal that she had not had a child up until their old age.
It's this sort of thing that usually gets me a little bit frustrated with people who try to pull stuff from the Bible. We all know about cherry picking and stuff, but
Mhm.
they try to pull things out of the Bible that are put there because they are historically and culturally relevant, that don't necessarily transfer to today's time, because not being pregnant is not a disgrace in our culture,
No,
but it is in this one, and it is something that is a time period related thing. And yes, there might be some cultures today who still have that mentality, but it's not
Mhm.
it's not such a widespread thing. So you can't pick it out and say, well, see here, it's a disgrace for women to be pregnant, so we shouldn't have, that sort of. They start picking things out without the broader perspective.
Yep, yep. And we're going to hear again the other part of this, why it's such a disgrace that she hasn't had a child yet. We'll hear about why it is in the next lesson here. But are there any questions about the foretelling of John's birth? Not, then let's actually jump into John's birth. So you'll notice that we go from verse 25 jumping into verse 57. In between those verses, this is where we get the annunciation to Mary about the birth of Jesus. Mary then goes to Elizabeth, what we saw in the beginning of the episode, where John leaps at the sound of Mary's voice, and where Elizabeth and her talk about how she is going to be the mother of her Lord. And this is where we jump into then the birth of John and the song of Zechariah. I wanted to focus on this rather than on that, as that focuses more on Jesus than on John, which was the main focus for the episode for today. And we get to hear a lot about Jesus. We don't get to hear a lot about John the Baptist, so let's give him some attention as a fellow saint and fellow believer in Christ. So let's look at the rest of Luke chapter 1, verses 57 all the way to verse 80, which is the end of Luke 1. All right, so when it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, "No, he is to be called John." They said to her, "There is no one among your relatives who has that name." Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, "His name is John." Immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the neighbors were filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, "What then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him. His father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets of long ago. Salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace." And the child grew and became strong in spirit, and he lived in the wilderness until he appeared publicly to Israel. Why were the people confused about the name that Elizabeth wanted to give to John?
It's a family name.
It wasn't a family name.
Yeah, it wasn't a family name. And that's the main reason why it was such a disgrace that they hadn't had a child. There was no way to pass on the family name. The name would come to an end with them.
But she says that's a disgrace before people. Doesn't that put the disgrace is happening because of others' judgments? Not in terms of a disgrace that their family name is going to die, but that there was the inability to carry it forward.
But that's all. It was all tied in together.
Okay.
Having of a child meant that your family name would be continued on for generations.
Mhm.
The fact that you couldn't have children was seen as a disgrace because you couldn't pass on your family name.
I wonder if it was also considered if you can't pass on your family name, that was a God judgment.
Yeah, and a lot of people did believe that. If you look back in the book of First Samuel, that's exactly what Hannah is basically saying. She's like, I don't know what I did, God, but I ask you, Lord, to please give me a child. And it often says that God closed up their womb. God closed up their womb. So it's clear that yes, the ability to have children or not to have children really is in the hands of God, and God can change what he does. Look at in Genesis with Jacob and his wives. One day they're able to have kids, and then suddenly their womb is closed up. And then it's opened again so that they can have more kids.
Pastor, I've always actually been a little confused by this because in Bible and genealogy, it doesn't say and Zachariah had Zachariah and he had Zachariah and he had Zachariah. So I'm guessing that the first name was Zachariah and the middle name or the second name was the child's given name and the one that they called him when he had to come home for dinner and stuff like that, or how did that work?
No, normally what you would do is you would use a family name, a name that is connected in some way to your family. You'd keep the same names with that family, that same tribe, that same clan, would use the same names over and over again.
Okay, so it was Zachariah. He could have called him something else, like his
Mhm.
brother's name or something like that.
Yes. Typically what you would do is you would either be named after your father or your grandfather or a great grandfather, depending, or a close male relative who had passed away.
Thank
So
God
it-
for that, because Deuteronomy would be so much more boring to read.
Yep.
So it makes perfect sense that we have two children named Josh.
Yes. Yep. That would not have been seen as completely unusual. Obviously, it's not typical, but that can happen depending on situations as a family name that's passed on. It's actually why we have last names at all, really, because we needed a way to indicate whose family name are you passing on. That's why you have Jameson or Smithson or things like that nature. It's because they were indicating who their father was and passing on that name to their children.
Don't get me started. This is this is the sort names that were actually like professions. If you were a tailor, and then
Yep.
there's plenty of evidence for at least in the Scandinavian and the Germanic regions, that the ending son was always there as it exists. You are Thompson. You are Thomas's son. Therefore, the name ends up continuing, and that's why we have a lot of those son ending names.
Yep, exactly. That is exactly what it is, and that's kind of what they were doing as well. You would pass on a family member's name and continue that family member's line. Zechariah and Elizabeth were old already. Well, one of them is going to die, so you might as well put the father's name onto your son because there's no way you're going to have a second child at this point in your life. So best to pass on his father's name to him because who knows how much longer Zechariah is going to be around. And then when she said no, they're like, okay, well, you have your brother's name, you have your uncle's name, you have your father's name, Elizabeth. Which name would you like to pass on? She says, no, his name is John. And no one in her family had that name. And that was a big issue for those people, and that's why they turned to Zechariah. So how does Zechariah show his change of heart after John was born? So he was doubtful in the beginning. What about now?
Well, he stated what God had told him to
Yeah,
when
he
he
did,
his
yeah, he could have at this point gone, no, his name's going to be Zechariah, Elizabeth. I don't know what you're talking about. But no, he's like, no, God told me his name is John. His name shall be John, so therefore his name is John. I don't care about passing on my name. I only care about doing what God has said is going to be true. And on that day, you remember, on that day when this happens, not when your son is born, not when Elizabeth becomes pregnant with your son, but on the day that all things have been fulfilled, Elizabeth will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name John. And now he has given him the name John, and now he's able to speak once again.
That addresses the question about why did he not already be able to speak when she got pregnant? It's because Gabriel told him specifically, these things are going to happen. And that's the day those things are fulfilled is the day he'll be able to speak.
Yep, exactly.
They missed that,
Yep. They didn't know when he was going to be able to speak, and then suddenly when he named his son John, on the day that he named his son John, 8 days after he had been born, that is when he was finally able to speak. So it would be 10 months and 8 days after he was told about this. Actually, probably a few more days because it says that he stayed there and finished his duty, which who knows how long he was there. It could have been several months that he was unable to speak before he went and saw his wife, told her what happened, and then it was another 10 months before she gave birth to the son, and then another 8 more days until he was actually able to speak again.
A very quiet household, I would imagine.
I would imagine it would have been. I think it would have been very strange for Elizabeth. Her husband goes off talking, and then he comes back unable to speak for another year, pretty much.
It's usually not the male that makes the house loud. So, uh-oh, I'm getting
God, really? You're going to go there? Man, I would say don't talk.
Well, I think it's funny that that was what was chosen. Usually God chooses things for a reason. So I wonder if Zachariah was just like he really liked to talk, or it was a really big part of his life.
Or maybe he was a really poor listener and always was waiting to say his piece. So now this was a chance for Elizabeth to get her words in.
Well, as a priest, he probably had to do a fair amount of speaking. So
Mm-hmm.
in a way, it was probably a more severe punishment than than just anyone.
Yep. And let's also consider he'd also expressed doubt to Gabriel, vocalizing his doubts, and it would have been easy for him to then vocalize those same doubts to his wife. But instead we see once she found out, she says, nope, this is from the Lord. I trust in what God has said.
But wouldn't that punishment, as it may it be called, that for Zechariah, also have negatively impacted his wife, since she didn't have a voice in society, and now her husband, I don't know, was he able to continue? I mean, sorry, it doesn't tell us this, but was he able to continue his job? What did they do? I mean, were they?
Yeah.
I mean,
It
was a
does
big
say,
deal.
it does
was a
say,
big deal.
right here at the end of verse, and in verse 23, when his time of service was completed, he returned home. So on the first day of his job, and his turn at doing the job, he suddenly was unable to speak. And then he continued to work until he returned home. So the way that it
And-
worked is that you would, as a priest, when it was your tribe's turn, so he was of the descendants of the priestly division of Abijah. So when that group of priests were up for taking care of the temple, they would travel to Jerusalem and they would live in the temple for a time period. And they would be the ones in charge of all the sacrifices, making sure that the incense was there, the oil was filled. That was their job. They were to take care of the temple for a time period. And so that's what Zechariah was doing. And it seems that on the first day he was there, it was his turn to do the incense. He went before it and was suddenly unable to speak. And yet he finished out his service.
I'm
So
just
he-
wondering, like, how many times they had that rotation? Did he not come up again for the rest of
There,
his
I'm
pregnancy?
not
I mean,
sure how many groups there were. I think there are a few. I think there's like 3 or 4 that I know of, because there would have been probably one for Phineas, one for Abijah. I think there were at least 2 other priestly groups that were up for duty. So it was probably every 9 months. So I mean, it would have been around the time that he would have had to probably go back, that he was finally able to speak again.
Well, don't forget, he wasn't the only one of that tribe, because it does say they drew lots, which means he was selected out of a pool to do the incense. Does not mean the others weren't participating at any point.
Yep. It was always a group of people, a family of people who come from the same line who were up for duty. It was their job then to take care of the temple, and then they could go home. And that's what's happening here, is that his family was up. He suddenly wasn't able to speak, but he continued his job. It notes that they did signs to him, some form of sign language with him to be able to talk with him. He often wrote things down, apparently, as he indicated for a writing tablet. So he was still able to participate, as you are pointing out, Carrie. He was still able to speak for his wife. It just wasn't a physical speaking. It was a let me write down things and show it to you so that you know what I have to say. But now the final thing, the people asked what this child is going to be, since they didn't seem to want him to have the name Zechariah, but instead to have the name John. Now, in your own words, summarize Zechariah's answer to that question, which is really the song of Zechariah. What is this child to be?
He was going to be the fulfillment of prophecy. And it's really awesome that everything Zechariah says had to be recognizable by more than just, priestly educated, because all these things were passages, the words he's using are passages pulled directly from Old Testament.
Yeah.
You know, and referencing those sort of things, you know, swore to our father Abraham, holy covenant, salvation from enemies. I mean, all these things, you know, the Most High, going before the Lord. I mean,
Yep.
so
Exactly.
in summary, he was pretty much saying that this is the fulfillment of the prophecies. We are in that time now where the prophecies will be fulfilled.
Yep, exactly. And he's saying, and John is the one who's leading the way, preparing the way before the Lord. The voice in the wilderness that cries, prepare the way for the Lord. Exactly. Now, are there any other questions about the birth of John and about his birth being foretold? Anything about that early part of John's life before we get to the end of John's life? If not, then we're going to jump into the death of John, where we are going to see exactly how he died and ultimately why he was put to death. And we'll be using Mark chapter 6, verses 17 until verse 29. So let's read that. So this is picking up in the middle of the Mark 6, obviously. In this, Jesus is starting his ministry and becoming really well known, where everybody is talking about him. And Herod hears about Jesus and is like, oh my goodness, is this John the Baptist come back from the dead? And that's when Mark goes back in time and says, this is what happened to John the Baptist. Why is he worried that Jesus is John the Baptist come back from the dead? Well, this is why. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? The head of John the Baptist, she answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. All right, so what was the reason that John was arrested?
He spoke the truth to power.
Yes, exactly. And what was that truth that he said?
Called out the queen for her infidelity.
Exactly. Herodias was married to Herod's brother Philip. And she ended up leaving him and marrying Herod. This was not permitted in Jewish culture. That's what John is saying. It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Meaning, Philip is still alive at this point. It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Because if we look at a lot of the kinsman redeemer type stuff, we do see, okay, brothers are to take their brother's wife in order to continue that family line. But here it doesn't seem like that's the case. It's Philip is not dead. Herod has taken his wife for himself. That is what is unlawful. And that is why he is arrested. But why was he only arrested and not put to death like Herodias wanted?
I think Herod might have been a little bit afraid of John and what he was saying.
He was pondering on it.
And he was also somewhat intrigued, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Herod was nominally Jewish. He loved the Jewish religion and tended to act in accordance to the Jewish religion, and yet he was puzzled, but he liked to listen to what John had to say. Now, how did Herodias finally get what she wanted?
Sorry, we were having a side conversation here. Is this Herod the grandson of the Herod who killed all the kids under 2? I wonder if he's like trying to put together some pieces and pondering on that.
I'm trying to think, because, okay, so Herod, who wanted to kill all the children who went down, which sent Joseph and Mary down to Egypt, he died. And then his son took over as king. And then his son was killed, and his other son, Herod Agrippa, took over. No, I think this is just his son. So it's not a grandson, it is his son. If I am remembering it all correctly, the timelines lining up in my head. I'd have to actually look
I
at
wonder
a.
if he's making some connections. That's what I do all day for my 5th graders, try and make connections. I wonder if he's trying to make some connections there.
It's quite possible, yeah, that he's trying to make some connections. But now, how did Herodias finally get what she wanted?
Alcohol,
Well,
sex.
I mean, she tricked him.
Yeah,
She was
she
quite a piece of work.
Yeah. She saw an opportune time at his birthday when her daughter came and danced so well that he wanted to give her whatever she asked for. She saw an opportunity to be able to kill Herod, or to kill John the Baptist. How does Herod then react to the request of the daughter of Herodias? How does Herod react?
Well, I mean, he did what she asked. I mean, he is he had to protect his honor. I mean, he said he
Mhm.
would give her anything she asked for, up to half his kingdom. So
There's a lot of side conversations going on here, just saying.
That's
They're on-
okay.
they're on mute.
Yeah, no, and we see he's really being pulled in two directions. One, he's like, I don't want to kill John because I like listening to him, but I did make this promise. I made this oath, not just to the daughter of Herodias, but in front of everybody. So everybody heard him make that oath. So now he has to honor it.
Yeah,
This
he did
is-
he did it publicly, so now it's like he has to show the king follows through on his word, right?
Yep, exactly.
And it's a really good example of how we all at times put our own pride and position and ego in front of doing the right thing, which in this case would have been, no, sorry, John is a holy man and I'm not going to kill him. That would have been the correct answer, but his ego and his pride, he chose that instead.
Yep, exactly.
But
He
he was at
chose-
least having a personal struggle over it.
Yep, yep. We do see he does have that small personal struggle with it, but ultimately he loses out on it and decides, nope, I made an oath. I got to keep my word.
What's funny is like this is just an earlier example of what, again, I'm doing the parallels, but Pontius Pilate. Pilate struggled with sentencing Jesus to death. He tried everything short. I mean, he was like, he had him beaten, he had him whipped, he had had his guards treat him like crap, and still he was trying to do everything short of actually killing Jesus. So Pilate struggled and Herod's struggling. So it's kind of another interesting parallel.
Yep, exactly. He tried his hardest to spare Jesus, but ultimately, even he had to say, well, then fine, I'm washing my hands of this situation. Let his blood be on your heads. And that's when John the Baptist is put to death. He is executed and beheaded. Now, are there any questions about the death of John or about anything that we had in this lesson? If not, that is all that I have for tonight. Unless anyone has anything else they would like to state and say.
No, just want to say thanks, Pastor, and thanks, everyone.
Yep, no problem. I will send out an email in a little bit here with just some dates and times that'll work for me for the showing of episode 2 of season 4. We will again watch it here at church. I have access to the first 4 episodes, so any of those times, just send out what times are going to work best for you. And then ultimately, I'm going to try and make it so that only a couple of those days will be available. And it'll be each week, it'll be the same couple of days where I will be here at church for anyone who wants to come and see those episodes.
Thanks. Good
That's all
night.
I had.
It's good to hear, Pastor. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yep, no problem. Have a great night, you guys.
You too.
Night.